I'm Chris Drake. I'm one of 10 kids to the Wally and Anna Marie Drake family. We've lived on Jarvis Lake since my dad was out here in '32 when he was a teenager. In the mornings, you could come by here in June, July, 6 o'clock in the morning, and the shoreline is erupting with carp. They're just rolling over. They're in 4, 5, 6 inches of water. And there's many of them. I mean, it's all around the lake.
The Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District is a special purpose unit of government that primarily manages flood control and water quality and our water resources within the drainage area of the district. Now, in recent years, we've been finding that there's a lot of issues happening in the lakes that are impacting water quality and that we need to start addressing those. And the only real fisheries issues we've had are carp.
So as the years went by, we kept notes and kept pretty good track of where we saw these aggregations in the chain, and did some literature search and try to figure out what people knew about carp. And there really isn't that much out there.
There's no data and statistics kept on carp. And they aren't a game fish, so they aren't regulated.
Right now, anyway, it looks like we have a serious problem on our hands, and this research is definitely worth doing in the Phelan chain.
Peter Sorensen, professor in fisheries, wildlife, and conservation biology at the University of Minnesota.
We contracted with Dr. Peter Sorensen at the University of Minnesota to include us in a package of studies that he's been starting to implement in around the metro area.
We've been working actively for, I guess it's about a year and a half with a student and postdoc, part-time postdoc. And it's sort of growing and doing really well. It's a real pleasure to work with Ramsey-Washington.
And he gets very excited about it. And that's great, because you normally approach a common person in the field and ask them what they think about carp, you'd have a hard time getting their interest.
I've been working with a relative of the carp, the goldfish, for some 30 years. I realized the more I looked that this was a very interesting topic, because a lot of people were very emotional about it. People thought they were a big problem, but when you really look, nobody seemed to know anything. And yet, from my perspective, they're nothing but a really big goldfish.
He's a tremendous find as far as I'm concerned.
I can't say enough about the team that he's put together and the dedication that they have.
And so the university has the benefit of properly structuring a long-term research project and being able to know that at the end of that research project they've got reliable, useful data.
Sort of a couple objectives. One is to understand whether the game fish in most normal lakes can control the abundance of young carp under normal circumstances by just eating the young. We were also very interested in understanding the movement of adult carp within that system as they move between lakes, and then how many there are as well. That's, I guess, the third major point.
So what we're doing out in the Phelan chain is very novel and will be of value not only to the watershed, but also to the scientific community at large.
The problem is that there really has been no systematic data collected on carp in general. People seem very reluctant to spend money on things that they dislike, I think. People dislike carp.
Carp are thought of as a trash fish, a fish that really doesn't belong, doesn't have any value.
I'm not a carp hater. I have a great deal of respect for the animal. It's a minnow from Eurasia. It's a minnow that grows to be very large. In Minnesota, we've caught carp over 50 years old routinely. They're known for having high fecundity. A female can have, in Minnesota, we found up to 3 million eggs. It was first discovered by the Romans several thousand years ago, who realized that it was a really hardy animal and partially cultured it for the Roman legions and transported it across Europe. And as the Roman Empire, as it faded, the carp were left distributed widely throughout a great deal of Europe. And at about that point in time, the Catholic Church was also looking for a source of non-meat for Fridays and moved it even more extensively. By the 1900s, Europe was experiencing a lot of famines, and there was a large amount of immigration from Europe. The newly arriving immigrants longed for the fish that they had at home. There were literally thousands of letters being written each year to members of Congress begging for carp. And they were brought over in the U.S. In the late 1870s. They were raised in reflecting pools in Washington, D.C., and distributed across the country by railroad cars for about 20 years before people started to realize this was a horrible mistake. By the late 1950s, there were carp everywhere. Water quality was bad. A lot of people believed it was carp, but nobody really knew. Nobody knew how many there were. The state government agencies were no longer interested in controlling them because nothing seemed to work. It just seemed like a pretty hopeless cause. That's kind of where we were left. My lab at the University of Minnesota, I suspect, is the largest and most focused carp research lab in North America. But this is all apparatus that we can use to isolate and fractionate pheromonal compounds. One thing we've been doing with carp is recording from the nervous systems in the brain to see what they perceive and detect. And that's what this device is here. It's a electrophysiological apparatus for measuring nerve responses.
Dr. Sorensen gets funding from a number of different sources. Our watershed district has set up a research fund that we draw on for projects like this, where we see a direct benefit to the programs and resources of our district. So we've allocated some of those dollars toward the research project.
Right now we're radio tracking some of the fish that we tagged in the spring. We implanted radio tags in each of the fish, and we're able to, each fish has an individual signal, and we're able to follow that fish anywhere in the lake. So we've been doing this since the spring, almost every week, and then also during the winter. We're using this to identify how the fish move in between each of the lakes here in the Phelan chain and where they're aggregating.
We find that basically they're smart and they understand the topography and connections between the lakes. So it seems that one of the things we're learning is that they will overwinter in the deep, well-oxygenated lakes, and for some reason they aggregate in these places.
So this past winter, we were involved in a large-scale carp netting operation.
When I saw what they were doing on the ice, tagging carp and counting them, I mean, I've never seen so many carp.
So the first thing is to figure out how many are there. So that primary thing there was to catch as many as we could, mark them, measure them, take some samples, see how old they are.
And they pulled in, I think they estimated about 3,000 carp, and actually physically measured and tagged about 1,000 of those and released them.
And then we're going to go back next winter and we're going to recapture them, as many as possible. And by looking at the number of marked to unmarked, we can come up with a quantifiable population estimate that will tell us with some error bars how many are actually out there.
I would hope they're going to take a slew of them out next year after they get all their readings, because what I saw come out of that lake was shocking. I'm surprised the lake didn't go down 2 feet by the time they removed them. Wow.
This summer we're going to continue tracking fish that have radio tags. We're also going to have a better handle on the effects of bluegill on carp eggs.
I want to answer the hypothesis, do sunfish control populations? They drive the population dynamics of common carp.
And then at the end of this year, we'll be able to have that population number, where they're spawning, how they're spawning, that movement of carp issue finalized, and be able to draw some conclusions.
I think try all 4 treatments to get started.
Well, bluegills correlate so strongly with the absence of carp. Do they eat their eggs? Yes, they do eat their eggs. The question now is, do they eat enough? And this is the experiment for this year.
Although carp have 3 million eggs, they're also their Achilles heel because they're so vulnerable. They're just tiny, clear things that are totally defenseless. So if there's a good game fish community, it seems they can come along and just vacuum it up.
Last summer, we did diet sampling. We found that, I think it was like 95% of the fish that were eating carp eggs were bluegill sunfish. But really all we've looked at is eggs so far. So we still have to look at larvae, which should open it up. We're going to build essentially fish enclosures. And so we'll be able to stock these enclosures with certain fish. So essentially we'll be testing what fish communities will be able to control carp improvement.
And so far it looks like in big lake systems, carp really aren't all that successful. And that may be because there's a high population of bluegill sunfish. Peter's research team has found that there's a lot of carp reproduction taking place in these small lake systems, and these fish may actually move down into the main chain of lakes.
These movements through waterways are quite systematic. What they're doing is they're looking for areas to have their young, and they're particularly looking for areas that are devoid of native fishes, because if they have their young in these areas that are devoid of native fishes, and often these are areas that have experienced severe winter kills, severe winters, then their young have a chance of surviving because they won't get eaten. And they're kind of outsmarting all the native fish in this respect.
We may be looking at stocking those systems with bluegill sunfish.
And so if we can manage that, then we can probably manage the number of new carp that are getting into the system.
If you're going to remove the young, then you should also prevent new adults from moving in. So yes, barriers in targeted ways.
And then if we can somehow address the population of the carp that we already have and reduce that number, then we should be able to get carp under control.
My name is Jordan Wine. I'm a carp intern for the Ramsey, Washington Watershed District. We have to barricade some areas to keep them from moving from certain places to another. When it gets to that point in their development, when they know it's time to move somewhere else, it's really tough to stop them from getting there. And they seem to find ways to do it. Everybody likes the clear lakes, the large bass, the fish that they like to fish, and carp can really have a strong influence on this.
One reason we have so many is because, frankly, they're pretty crafty. It's not that they're stupid or anything, far from it. They do some really interesting things that are quite surprisingly sophisticated. Just had to look. You can, for instance, teach a carp to learn a maze, and not only will it learn it, and it will learn the pattern of right versus left turns. That's a certain level of cognition, really. They will remember that certainly for many months. They have an exquisitely developed taste system and sensory system in their mouths, which allows them to feed in the bottom in ways that no native fish can. So they're continually turning lakes upside down. They're pumping nutrients and sediments out and digging plants up. They turn the ecosystem inside out. I mean, that's what it amounts to, and everything goes along with it.
My name is Hankyo Lim. I'm working as a postdoc here, and my expertise here is identifying and developing female and male carp sex pheromones from which we can develop potent carp attractants. I'm a trained entomologist. Yeah, my PhD is moth pheromone. Dr. Sorensen actually hired me to kind of apply my previous experience on moth pheromone to this new system. Using the infrared light and a CCTV camera, which feeds a real-time footage to the TV monitor. So we just observe the TV monitor to actually see how they behave. We try to understand which specific test order is attractive or neutral or repelling. So there are the four fish are hanging here, and this size it has some pheromone stuff. They seem to have already detected. This is kind of a sign of their interest.
So do you ever get sick of carp?
Yeah, especially whenever they are not behaving the way that I expected. Yeah, I've been working on this carp for 3.5 years, but always interesting, honestly.
Electrofishing is a technique that creates an electric field in the water that actually stuns fish. And so when we want a certain sex or a certain size of a fish, we can pick and choose which one we want because it brings just about everything that's within that field up to the surface and able to be caught.
So we're hunting for one good fish, and they're easy to miss.
I'm Sage Passy. I work for Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District as a school and community-based project coordinator. The goal of the watershed is to engage people in working together to improve water quality and helping everybody see how their role makes a difference. With students these days, we're really trying to create a literacy about observation. We started out by sitting down with the scientists and asking them what they thought kids would be excited about what they're doing. And they started to help translate some of their very technical processes into a language that kids could understand.
When the alien fish like carp come in, they can move faster than the other native fish. So they're able to get in there before the other native fish can. And then they kind of just take it over because they're the first ones in and they're like a big bully.
And they can actually dig down into the mud almost a foot. So it can go down this deep into the mud trying to pull out all those little worms.
What was cool about working on the Carp Project with students in the East Metro area was that now they have a new identity. Carp are much more than they thought they were. They didn't realize how powerful they were in terms of affecting an ecosystem.
A lot of people thought really nothing could be done about carp, and that they wouldn't be very interesting, and glad to say that hasn't proven to be the case.
There's the potential of doing large-scale carp removal, which research has shown that this could significantly benefit water quality in the Phelan chain. So really that's our ultimate goal, is to improve water quality in the chain.
So we're not after extermination, we're after controlling them to a reasonable, sustainable level that people can afford that'll make a difference.
When you're involved with the Watershed District, you know that you're really one big community. It's not one city fighting another city, it's everybody trying to work in concert to solve everybody's problem.
The science, it's been great. I mean, we've learned a tremendous amount, and we're getting some really new and interesting data on the biology and ecology of an invasive fish.
My cohorts, other professionals, kind of are envious of the project and really can't wait to see the data come out. And I'm really glad that we had an opportunity to perform this work in the Phelan chain of lakes.